So thanks everybody for joining me today, and I'm excited to do this presentation. You know, the fact that I've published multiple books on the service desk tells you that I'm just a huge proponent of that function within the IT organization, and I'm kind of excited by what's going on in the service desk industry right now, in the support industry. It really, the role is changing significantly, and the importance of the service desk, it's always been important to the business, but today, really more than ever, this role is important to the business. And one of the other changes that I'm seeing is more and more use of Agile and Lean methods in the service desk. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So Karen introduced ITSM Academy, and she introduced me. So let me introduce what I'm going to talk about. Just very quickly, I'm going to talk about Agile, and then more specifically, what role does Agile play in support services? And when I say support services, for the purposes of this audience, I'm talking about the service desk, and I'm talking about like desktop support, you know, perhaps line 2 support types of functions. I'm going to do a little very quick Scrum 101. I'm going to talk a little bit about Kanban, and then I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about getting started. Now, a lot of you have already gotten started, and you're already starting to use Scrum and Kanban for your projects, and hopefully for those of you who already are using those practices, I'll kind of give you some ideas about how to use them more. And for those of you who said, tell me more, let's go. So why is Agile one of those words that we're hearing everywhere? And let's talk a little bit about context when it comes to the term Agile. So if you really just look at the dictionary definition of the term Agile, it's really about being quick and more importantly, being well coordinated. We know in this day and age that he who moves the fastest is going to win. We also have to, in this day and age, be really resourceful. We have to be able to, you know, as quickly as possible and as skillfully as possible, be prepared to deal with new situations that come up. Priorities change constantly, our environments change constantly, technologies change constantly, and resourcefulness is all about dealing with those changes in the most skillful and quick ways possible. So we all, I think, understand using the term Agile just in the dictionary sense of the term to our work world today. If you look at the term Agile in the context of development, and historically it was in the context of software development, but I'm going to use it in a broader term. I'm going to use it in the context of just development in terms of developing any type of project. Agile's really about, and Agile methods tend to be methods in which requirements and solutions evolve. So one of our organizers, if you could mute yourself, somebody, I'm hearing one of our organizers, I think, please. So methods in which requirements and solutions evolve, you often hear the word iterative used, and also where that evolution occurs through collaboration and collaboration across an entire IT value stream. So many of you may be hearing today the term DevOps used a lot. So that's collaboration between the development organization and the operations side of the house. That collaboration may be between the service desk and the desktop support teams, right? But bringing together cross-functional teams and allowing them to self-organize. And self-organizing is really about letting the people who are experts in their particular areas figure out how best to work together and how best to get their work done. So these methodologies are the Agile development methodologies are a little bit different than traditional project management. It's still a project management methodology, but historically you had a project manager who kind of laid out this really complex task list and told everybody what to do. And with Agile development methodologies, you're really looking at more of a team approach. So it's really critical in this day and age that we all adopt a more Agile approach. Now, one of the most widely used methodologies, it's certainly not the only methodology, but one of the most widely used methodologies is Scrum, and I saw that 45% of you are using Scrum from an Agile methodology standpoint. Scrum, by definition, is an iterative and incremental framework for completing complex projects. Now, Scrum originally came out of the software development world, and you very often see it continue to be used in the software development world. But notice it doesn't say software development. It says any form of complex project. And that's the context in which we're going to talk about Scrum in this section, session. When we talk about support services, you typically have two, at the highest level, you have two major categories of work. You have what I'm going to call unplanned work, and that is typically in the form of your support contacts. According to the HDI 2014 Member Practices Survey, if you talk about the service desk, for example, about 64% of your work is unplanned. So that's calls coming into the service desk or tickets coming into the service desk through email or chat or whatever delivery channels you're using. So 64% of your work is that unplanned work. But a percentage of your work is planned work. So it's project-oriented in nature. It's support for new products and services. So this is, projects that are coming in from the development side of the house into the production side of the house, and now the service desk or, the desktop support teams need to be prepared to provide the ongoing support. It could be just, projects, improvement projects, or projects to upgrade your processes or your systems within the service desk and support organization. So now, so let's talk about that perspective for a minute. So today, again, according to HDI, 64% of support contacts, are those unplanned tickets. 36% is other types of work. So it's projects, it's meetings, it's training, it's other types of work. If DevOps delivers on its promise, and for those of you who are not familiar with DevOps, DevOps is really a movement, and it's about introducing practices aimed at, first of all, improving the quality of the software that gets developed through collaboration between Dev and Ops from the get-go, right? Not just that traditional gateway, development's done and we're ready to throw it over the fence to Ops, but from the very beginning, having Ops involved in the development of software. So if DevOps delivers on its promise, which is improve the quality of the software that gets delivered, then what we're actually going to see is a reduction in the number of incidents that are occurring in the production environment. And in those organizations that are actually have had DevOps practices in place for a while, we're seeing that. We're seeing that they're able to significantly reduce the number of incidents that are occurring day to day. We're also seeing that the incidents that do in fact occur are much smaller impact, right? So we're not seeing these major, we release new software and for the next 3 days the service desk phones ring off the hooks. Many of these incidents that are occurring are incidents that can be automatically detected and perhaps even automatically corrected. So we're seeing, where the impact on the service desk is significantly less. So what does that mean? That means it frees up service desk resources to work on more proactive activities. We know in this day and age, for the service desk to be valued going forward, the service desk has to be more proactive in their approach. They have to really get good at, rather than fixing technology, helping business users to technology. And that might be by providing ad hoc education, by providing greater self-services, by really just being in front of the technology trends and making sure the business understands what technologies are available and how to best utilize those technologies. So while today, that split is 64% unplanned work, 36% planned work, it's very likely that in the next few years, again, as DevOps realizes its promise, we're going to see those numbers start to shift a little bit. So that's just the service desk part of it. If you look at it from the standpoint of desktop support, and I'm sure some of you out there are part of desktop support, the split's even greater. So in desktop support, again, according to HDI, 55% of your work is planned work, and 45% is that reactive work where you're actually handling tickets and you're handling incidents or you're handling problems. So in the service desk, there's maybe a small opportunity for some projects that can take advantage of these Agile methodologies. In the support teams, like desktop support, for example, there's even greater opportunity because you're doing more project work. Now, I want to make it really perfectly clear, and if you look at the text at the bottom of my screen, this is not a conversation about how to replace your incident management process, your problem management process. For those of you who have, for example, implemented ITIL or IT service management processes in your organization, what we're talking about here is very, very complementary to those processes. Those processes are doing a great job of handling that reactive work, handling that unplanned work. Your request fulfillment processes, your knowledge management processes. Those of you who are practicing KCS, we're not saying, you know, dismantle your KCS practices and start using Scrum. That's not what we're saying. All of that unplanned work, let these processes that you, in many of your organizations, already have really well established, let them do their job. Maybe make them a little leaner through iterative process improvement so that you can, you know, continuously increase their effectiveness, but we're not talking about replacing those processes. What we're really talking about in the context of Scrum is using Scrum to manage the projects that flow out of those processes. So all of that planned work that comes out of those processes. As an example, you may have an incident where in order to resolve that incident or prevent that incident from happening again, you may need to make some kind of change, and that change requires a project. So we're talking about that type of project-oriented work. Now, one of the projects that's really important for the service desk and for support organizations is support acceptance. And that is really just bringing new products and services into your organization and being prepared to provide for ongoing support. So why can Scrum help with these planned projects, and why is it so important from the support perspective that we look at using Scrum or Agile practices? First of all, in many support organizations, there's just too many surprises. You know, I often joke like, okay, it's what, Thursday? When was the last time that, you know, the development organization made a change to the production environment and didn't tell the service desk about it? And chances are it's already happened, you know, this week in your organization. So very often the service desk and support organization gets surprised, right? They're just not aware of what's coming their way, and therefore they're not prepared to take on support. Too many meetings, and it's not about too many meetings, it's really about too many unproductive meetings. It's about having meetings that maybe run on too long, where we don't have a clear agenda, we don't stick to the agenda. You all have been in those meetings, I don't need to belabor the point. Having too much work in progress, and everybody, I think it's just a part of our culture today that we all have way too many balls in the air, and it's really counterintuitive to limit work in progress. It's really counterintuitive to say, okay, in order to move faster, we have to try to start doing less on any given day. But you all know what happens. If you have too many balls in the air at one time, invariably something happens. There's some impediment that stands in the way of you completing one of those tasks. So first of all, it's lingering out there. It's rattling around in the back of your mind, distracting you. And the tendency is to then, okay, put that on hold and now pick up yet another ball and throw yet another ball in the air. So too much work in progress, and you couple that with, you know, unresolved impediments where you've just, you know, on any given day you've got multiple things standing in the way of getting your work done. And then, you know, if things are impeded for too long, chances are the priorities are going to change, right? So now all of a sudden, you know, we're looking at, you know, having to completely rework something perhaps because a priority changed, and rework equals waste all day long. It's just all day long waste. Add to all that the fact that our customers very often have really unrealistic expectations. I know that on any given day you're getting a call saying, hey, we have a new employee who started this morning. Can you get down here and get them set up? You know, and you kind of go like, how come we didn't know before this they were starting today? But having said that, you know, we've got maybe unrealistic customer expectations, and perhaps we have some bloated processes. Maybe our processes aren't as lean as they could be. Maybe we've got too many handoffs, or we've got too many approvals. Whatever it is that is you know, impeding your ability to kind of really have work flow smoothly through processes, you know, add those two together, unrealistic expectations and bloated processes, and you're going to miss commitments, and missed commitments equals dissatisfied customers and stakeholders and really dissatisfied coworkers, right, on any given day. So what's Scrum about? And I'm going to go through this very quickly because this session is not about Scrum, but for those of you who aren't familiar with Scrum, it's really a very simple methodology, and it's relatively simple to explain. Scrum has 3 roles, 4 artifacts, and 5 meetings. The 3 roles are product owner, team, and remember I talked about the notion of self-organizing in cross-functional teams, and someone called a Scrum Master. The product owner owns what's called a product backlog. Now I know in service and support sometimes that word backlog has a little bit of a negative connotation. It kind of means we're behind in our work, but really in this case a product backlog is really a list of requirements. It's a list of tasks that needed to be completed for a particular project, and the product owner owns that product backlog. So you may have a product backlog for a new release of software, or you may have a product backlog for some type of a hardware refresh that you've got going on, or perhaps, you know, a product backlog for your, I don't know, support system. If you use Remedy or ServiceNow, one of those products, you've got a product backlog for all of the enhancements that you want to make to that product. And it's the product owner who is responsible for ranking or prioritizing that product backlog, and therefore determining what needs to be done. What are those tasks that can deliver the most value to the business? And let's keep everybody focused on delivering those highest value items first. And typically that's done through some form of a release planning meeting. How do we get all that work done? Well, the team gets that work done through a series of what are called sprints. And sprints are time-boxed iterations of work. And notice that sprints are relatively short, typically between 2 to 4 weeks. So what you're doing, and typically you do this in some form of sprint plan meeting, is you're carving out the set of work items that you can complete, or the set of backlog items, I should say, that you can complete during a 2 to 4 week period of time. And notice that you're carving out those highest priority items, right? It's product owner's responsibility to make sure everybody knows what the highest priority items are. Let's carve those out first. Let's get them done as quickly as possible and deliver. And notice it says a potentially releasable product. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to release it, but you've at least completed that portion of work. You can call it done, and there's a very formalized definition of done in Scrum. And then you may queue up, right, those potentially releasable products and release them all together at some point in the future. Every day, every 24 hours, there's a 15-minute daily Scrum meeting where the team comes together and they make very, very visible how they're doing. Every team member says, here's what I did yesterday, here's what I'm going to do today, and here are any impediments that are standing in my way. You know, you all have maybe been on a project where somebody is telling you, one of your project teammates is saying, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine, and then when it's almost like too late to do anything about it, they say, well, I haven't been able to move forward because I've had some impediment. So part of what that daily Scrum is about is making those impediments visible and making really very visible to everybody what work is going on to make sure that we're all kind of moving forward in the time frame we need to in order to be successful. It's the Scrum Master's job to, first of all, make sure everybody is following the Scrum methodology and understands the Scrum methodology. And it's also the Scrum Master's job to deal with those impediments, to figure out how to remove those impediments so that the team can get back to doing their work. One of the last steps in a sprint is to do what's called a sprint retrospective. And in the sprint retrospective, you're really, as a team, coming together and talking about how can we improve our processes, can we improve our performance before we go into the next sprint, before we go into the next iteration. What can we do? How can we do better next time? So that's Scrum in a nutshell. Now, what are some of the key concepts here? First of all, it's about self-organizing teams. It's really about making sure that you've got a team that is committed to figuring out how to most effectively get this work done, given the priorities that have been set by the product owner. How do we work together in order to get this work done? Short incremental sprints, and there's a lot of beauty in sprints. You really have the ability to get focused. That's where work in progress limits are really critical. It's like, this is what we're going to work on. We're only going to work on this set number of tasks. Everybody's going to focus on those set number of tasks. Hopefully, through good planning, we've got fewer impediments as a result. Conceptually, you don't pull something into a sprint if you're not going to be able to work on it. If there's some known impediment that's standing in your way, maybe having equipment delivered, or maybe having to count on a vendor to take care of something for you, and their lead time is 6 weeks out. Well, you wouldn't pull that kind of work into the current 2-week sprint. The good news is you also, because you're doing work more iteratively, you're getting feedback more quickly. You're delivering work, you're able to quickly get feedback from stakeholders, and you're able to take that feedback, and here's where that sprint retrospective comes into play. You're able to take that feedback, feed it back into the cycle so that you don't go too awfully far down the road. If you're a little bit off track with your product deliverable, you don't go too awfully far down the road with that. You're able to relatively quickly correct it because you're getting that quick feedback. And you're also able to, again, demonstrate that we've gotten things done. There may be smaller things than we're used to. They're not the result of a 6-month or a 9-month project where we have this big, fully completed and, fully fleshed out system, but we can demonstrate that we're getting things done, and you're going to find that there's a momentum in that. So Scrum embraces the values and principles of what's called the Agile Manifesto, and I'm not going to talk about the Agile Manifesto. You can Google it. It's a few-page document that you can read fairly quickly, but I do want to talk about some of the key principles of the Agile Manifesto, and they are to, first of all, be willing to respond to change, to understand that in this day and age, even if we have a project plan, and here's one of the challenges historically we faced with project planning. We've got this big plan, and we're all kind of marching in the same direction, but all of a sudden the direction changes and we keep following the plan because it's kind of, what you're supposed to do with plans. So being responsive to change, being responsive to and constantly collaborating with our customers, always keeping our finger on the pulse of what's really important to our customers, of getting things done, of having working software, or even if it's only a part of a project, being able to demonstrate that we got that project done. And also just collaboration, just really respecting the role that each and every individual plays on a team, and creating a culture and an environment where we collaborate effectively and we interact effectively. If you think, let's bring lean values into play as well, also looking for opportunities to, remove waste, improve flow, and at the end of the day, always let's focus on delivering value to our customers. So that was a little bit of Scrum in a nutshell. So let's now, again, come back to talking about Scrum and the service desk and support. And I want to talk in particular about the notion of Scrum and support acceptance. It's kind of an age-old challenge that the service desk faces and that support organizations face, where there's all this development work going on, and sometimes we're not even hearing about all that development work going on, and then somewhere along the line Dev knocks on the door and says, here you go, service desk, start supporting this. And in some cases we're just not prepared to do that. So one of the best and most effective ways to use Scrum is to participate in the sprints that are already happening on the dev side of your house. So the beauty of the service desk and support professionals learning Scrum, learning to speak the language of Scrum, is that they can go down to the stand-ups that are happening on a daily basis in dev. They can be watching what's happening on the dev side of the house. And if you look at the bottom of my screen, they can start to introduce and submit their requirements. So when we look at this notion of a product backlog, part of what, and I'm going to take software just as an example, part of what should be in the product backlog for software are things like non-functional requirements, availability, capacity, continuity, security, right? All of those what ITIL refers to as warranty-related requirements that are going to become critical when we're moving this new service into the production environment. Support acceptance criteria. So service desk, what do you need in order to take on support for a new product? Let's have a checklist and let's make sure that those support requirements are being satisfied as part of developing the software. Not something where you're kind of standing there saying to dev, well, hold on, you can't roll this into production yet. You've got to provide all these things. If you provide that checklist very, very early on, and we're completing that checklist as development is occurring, all that work can flow smoothly into the production environment, and now everybody's prepared and ready to provide support from day one. Also, embedding support knowledge into the development environment. Historically, if you look at organizations that have implemented IT service management or ITIL processes, incident management is something that very often is confined to the production environment, and they actually call it something different, right? They call it bug tracking in the development side of the house. But really, those are in their essence the same processes. And for some reason, we somewhere along the line started calling them different things. We actually use different systems. Sometimes they're using whatever, ServiceNow or Remedy in the production environment, and they're using some other tool in the development environment to track their bugs. So let's look at trying to integrate those processes so that we're hopefully using the same tools, or at least we're using a common vocabulary for how we're dealing with things like incidents and problems as we move from the development lifecycle through testing and into the production environment. Same thing with problem management. There's absolutely no reason why problem management can't be used in the development environment, right? Why is, there some type of a failure in the production environment as we move from, say, the development environment into the testing environment, and from the testing environment into the staging environment? What's happening there? Why is it happening? And what can we do to prevent it? Also, knowledge management. We know that invariably there are going to be errors that are brought forward into the production environment. Let's ensure, and here's where KCS is just such a beautiful fit for an Agile environment. Those of you who are practicing KCS out there, you kind of know exactly what I'm talking about, because part of what KCS does is say, let's just capture the fact that there's an error, and then on demand, iteratively, right? KCS is by its very nature iterative. Let's start to kind of expand on that knowledge and kind of flesh out, and here's where UFA comes into play, right? Flag it, fix it, add it, and then ultimately publish it in our production environment. So if we've got the service desk and we've got the support teams working in parallel with the development organization to satisfy these support acceptance requirements, we're going to be able to much more quickly take new changes into the production environment. The service desk and support teams won't be viewed as an impediment. They'll actually be viewed very much, and should be viewed very much, as an enabler of ensuring that we're doing everything we possibly can to ensure this new service or this new product delivers value from day one, instead of having what we sometimes have where there's this not so nice period of time when something initially goes live where the service desk phones are ringing off the hook. There are many other types of projects, right? And you all do these projects day in and day out, so I don't have to elaborate. You've got a hardware refresh. You've got some kind of software upgrades that you're doing. Maybe you're just making improvements even within the service desk. You're upgrading your own processes or systems. Maybe an improvement is just providing, better dashboards or better reporting to improve visibility in terms of what's happening within the service and support organization. Sometimes I think the service desk is just an unsung hero because we've got all this data, we're just not necessarily sharing it all. So I think a big improvement could be to look at how you can take all this data you're capturing day in, day out, all this feedback from customers, and provide that back to the development side of the organization. Maintenance, problems. You know, again, I'm not saying replace your problem management process. I'm not suggesting it. But one of the things that you could do is take a category of problems and use Scrum in order to look at, you know, to investigate and take action on how to eliminate that category of problems. So maybe you're having lots of network issues, so run a sprint to investigate why you're having those network issues and how you can eliminate those network issues. Remember, part of what Scrum's about is getting everybody focused, right? So your projects can kind of take that same approach. Same thing with knowledge articles. I'm not saying replace KCS, but what you could do is say, maybe you're just getting started with KCS, and so you want to populate your knowledge base. You want to do an initial, you know, couple of sprints. And so look at your incident data, look at what your most chronically recurring incidents are, and run a couple of sprints in order to populate a set of knowledge articles relative to those most frequently occurring incidents. You can also use sprints for process design and improvement. So maybe you have a sprint to define a new process, and then you run a series of sprints to design the activities associated with that process. And then maybe you run a series of sprints to look at how you're going to automate those processes. Maybe you run a sprint in order to look at improving a poor performing process, or a series of sprints. So one of the things I want to emphasize, and I've kind of said this in a few different forms, part of what Scrum is really all about is making what you're doing visible and really making sure that everybody knows all the time what's happening. Ken Schwaber, who's one of the original developers of Scrum, you know, says it this way: Scrum is like your mother-in-law, it points out all your faults. So it's one of those methodologies that's kind of fairly quickly easy to explain, but it's a little more difficult in action. It is absolutely culture change in its purest form, so understand that. Another method that you can use, and very often you see organizations that are using Scrum using Kanban as well as a method of making that work visible. So if you're not familiar with Kanban, it is a pull system that's designed to improve the flow of work through a process. And part of what Kanban is about, and a big piece of Kanban, is making work visible, making policies explicit, and limiting work in progress. I kind of talked a little bit already about just how demoralizing too much work in progress really can be within an organization. So a policy, for example, may be your work in progress limits, that you have no more than 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is in your organization, projects in play at any given point in time. Maybe it's pull priorities. Remember, it's a pull system. You know, when I free up and I've got some capacity in order to take on more work, I pull the next available project. So you may have some policies in terms of how you determine what you're going to pull first. Kanban helps you visualize and manage workflow, and also then lets you measure velocity, right? Because you can kind of see, and those of you, some of you may already be seeing Kanban boards all over your organization, and here's a very simplistic example of a Kanban board. But it really creates, in a very, very visual way, what work do we have in progress, what work is in our current sprint backlog, in other words, what work have we said we're going to do in the next 2-week period of time, and what work have we gotten done. And notice the little 4, right? The little 4 for in progress in this particular case is our work in progress limit. So we've said we will have no more than 4 items in progress at any given point in time. This could be sticky notes on a whiteboard, right? It can be that simple. But the idea is to make work visible, to make sure that if something is blocked or if there's an impediment of some kind that is standing in the way of somebody getting their job done, everybody knows about it, and really hopefully everybody's working together as a team to figure out how can we remove that impediment, or the Scrum Master is helping to figure out how to remove that impediment so we can all get back to getting our work done. So it doesn't have to be anything fancy. The best Kanbans are just simple Kanbans But you can imagine everybody standing around every morning for no more than 15 minutes saying, this is what I got done yesterday, this is what I'm going to do today, here are any impediments standing in the way of me getting my work done, and then think about the accountability there. It's going to become really obvious if you've got somebody who's kind of, for whatever reason, just not able to get their work done on a day-to-day basis. Maybe they're bad at estimating, or maybe they're just not good at, speaking to the idea of impediments. They're trying to work it out. They're trying to deal with the impediment, but, and they kind of don't want to be willing to admit that they need help. Whatever the reason, it makes all of that visible. So what are the benefits? Aligning with those Agile and Lean values, and again, I encourage you to go out and look at the Agile Manifesto, and Lean values are very much about removing waste, improving flow, delivering value to the business, being more transparent about everything so that everybody knows what's going on, and everybody is kind of committed to working together to improve our velocity, the amount of work that we're getting done in every iteration, making sure those impediments are very, very visible, and look at all the improvement opportunities. And I acknowledge it seems counterintuitive to, do less work, right? Limit work in progress. But it's really all about being focused on and getting 1, 2 things done, rather than having 10 balls in the air and nothing's really getting done. None of those 10 things are getting done. Lead time, which is very important to your customers, cycle time, communication, collaboration, and always customer and employee satisfaction. So how do you get started? Run a pilot, very simply. Define some goals. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to make work more visible? Are you trying to make impediments more visible? Are you trying to better manage priorities, right? Figure out what your goals are and get clear on what your work item types are. Remember that we're talking about planned work here, not unplanned work. So I guarantee you're going to have lots of conversations about, what we're going to handle via sprints and what we're not. And then use good organizational change management practices in order to get everybody involved and engaged and ready to use this new way of work. Now, good change management organizational change practices include preparing people, and part of that's about providing education. The beauty of Scrum is that there's a very common vocabulary associated with it. A lot of the service management tools on the market today, tools like ServiceNow, actually now have Agile modules built into them and Kanban modules built into them. So, and those modules reflect this Scrum vocabulary. So once you educate everybody on this vocabulary, you're going to be able to improve, your communication, your collaboration, because now everybody's using that common vocabulary. Motivate people, help everybody understand the benefits of Scrum, help everybody understand. I think all of us in this day and age are overwhelmed on any given day. So if we can help everybody understand that by limiting work in progress, by having a clear agreement on what's done, and when I became a Scrum Master, my teacher said that done was when you don't have to think about it anymore. Think about how good you feel when you're be able to do that, proverbial check something off your list and say, that's it, okay, fine. It's just, right? It in and of itself is motivating. And also equip people. Again, give people the tools and the skills that they need in order to do your job. And then communicate and share with others what you've learned. Share not only your successes, but share any failures. We all love going to presentations and hearing. I know when I go and see other people speak, when they say, let me tell you what not to do, it always gets my attention, right? So let's learn from each other's failures and maybe not reinvent or, be like teenagers and have to make the same mistakes, and kind of reap the benefit of others' lessons learned. So what are some of those lessons learned? A couple are that, one, this is culture change in its absolute purest form, so take it slow. Don't think that you're going to be able to overnight have everybody, practicing Scrum and sprints and daily stand-ups. It takes time to introduce that kind of culture change. Take it slow. Not everything belongs in a sprint, and this is one of the things you're going to find when you introduce Scrum into your organization. You're going to find everybody's going to kind of get excited about it, but all of a sudden we're going to start putting everything into sprints. Remember, especially in service desk and support, we're not talking about handling incidents in sprints. We're not talking about handling your normal day-to-day problem management and request fulfillment activities in sprints. We're really talking about projects. So you're going to have to, like, over and over and over again get clear on what types of work items are we going to be managing via these sprints. Remember that you can't work on processes and in processes in the same time. So what I mean by that is just know that you're going to have to take time to let everybody learn this new way of working. You're going to have to know that you might provide some education, and you might need to come back, within a relatively short period of time and provide some refresher education. It takes time for people to learn new ways of working, and they can't learn new ways of working when they're working. Hopefully that makes sense, right? When everybody's overwhelmed and everybody's really busy, it's kind of a tough time to ask people to change the way they're doing things. So you might have to pick a pilot where you don't have any existing work in progress, and you can kind of from the beginning say, okay, for this particular project, we're going to use Scrum. And remember, it's not about the tools. There's lots of great Kanban tools out there. Again, a lot of service management suites are now introducing Agile modules and Kanban modules into the service management suite. So the vendors are out there kind of making it possible for service desk and support to start to have the technology that they can use to support Scrum and Kanban practices, but it's not about the tools. It's never about the tools. It's really about your work practices. And then, oh, by the way, you have some technology that supports that. There's an old adage that if you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster, and it absolutely applies here. So accept that, and then celebrate your wins. The first time you do a sprint, I guarantee you're not going to get all your work done. I guarantee you, it just doesn't happen. Or you're going to have not pulled enough work, right? There's going to be something that's going to go on that you're going to go like, oh, okay, but we've learned from that, okay? There's, celebrate that alone, that you've learned something new. Use your sprint retrospective to look at how you can improve. And then, after a few sprints, celebrate the fact that you did, in fact, plan a sprint. You completed everything in that sprint backlog, and you actually maybe, pretty much conform to Scrum practices all along the way. Celebrate that. Keep it as simple as you possibly can. This is really about making it easier for people to do their work, not create more work. So keep that in mind. Keep it simple. I'd like to finish up with kind of my favorite quote, and that is that perfection is when there's nothing left to take away. So again, if you can kind of strip the idea of Scrum down to its most simplest form, and maybe for your organization, it's not about Scrum. Maybe Scrum, you just kind of go like, we're not even equipped to go there. Start with a Kanban. Maybe the Kanban board is the most simplest way for you to start to be more agile and to increase visibility. Figure out, right, what is the most stripped down way in which you can adopt these practices into your organization. But here's the really exciting thing about it. The dev teams have been talking since, the 90s about Agile and Scrum and Sprint and Kanban. And so now here's an opportunity for service desk and for support to start using that same vocabulary, to start using those same techniques. And I guarantee you're going to get management's attention. I guarantee you the CIO is going to be very, very excited to see both the dev and the ops and the service desk and the support teams all using this common vocabulary, all staying focused on how we can be as agile as possible, and all staying focused on how we can all collectively, as quickly as possible, deliver value to our customers. So some additional sources of information, if you want to download the official Scrum Guide, you can go to scrumguides.org. It's, I don't know, 10-page or so document, so it's really not a very comprehensive document, but it'll give you, I gave you Scrum in 2 minutes, and it'll give you a little more information about it. And then there's also a couple of other organizations like scrumalliance.org and kanbanlibrary.com where you can go out and get additional information. And of course, you can always, and we hope you do, reach out to us for additional information. So Karen, that's kind of my piece of things. Do y'all want to take over and move us forward? I know I hope we have some questions, and let's move on to that section of our session.
Donna. Donna, that was a great presentation. I mean, you know, you're giving us information on a whole bunch of things, and we do have a lot of questions. You have triggered a lot of questions from our audience today, so we'll give you a minute while we get those organized, and we will get started with those. Just before we start the Q&A session, for those of you that need to drop off, I just want to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, June 18th, and Brenda Iniguez, she's a senior sales executive with Fruition Partners, is going to join us. And Brenda's presentation is titled Generational Dynamics in Service Management. And Brenda's going to share tips with us to help the 5 generations work effectively together. And she says if you're like most companies, you're likely to have 3 to 5 generations on your teams. Come laugh and hear tips on how to attract and integrate the millennials and the boomlets into your service management team and explore what the rapid aging of America means to your company and what you should be doing to prepare so that you're not caught short by the wealth of tribal knowledge exiting en masse. You will learn things like how to help them communicate and produce results with one another without driving each other crazy, and which generational pairings work most effectively together. Join the webinar and have some fun with us as we explore creative ways to get things accomplished effectively for your customers and across the generations. So we hope that you'll join us for that. And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Eric Montijo. He's here with us today. He wants to share some information with us. Hello, Eric.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for introducing me, and thanks, Donna, for your excellent presentation today. Agile has quickly become one of our most popular lines. Certified Agile Service Managers set the bar for bringing Agile training to organizations, and the world has held its breath for CAPO, which is a Certified Agile Process Owner. I'm excited to see this class's first run on September 15th, and if you're not already Agile certified, come join us on June 29th to get an in-depth training you need to utilize the knowledge that you received here today. Further, I just want to quick plug our summer school sale. Life cycle classes are a great way to get ITIL intermediate certifications without having to sacrifice your entire day, or in some cases the whole week. With our sale, which is buy one, get one free on any summer life cycle classes, you can get the credits you need and PDUs for your project managers without sacrificing your time. So if you're interested and you want more details, go ahead and send me an email to info@itsmacademy.com. Give us a call at 954-491-3442, or just go online and buy with the coupon code Summer School. So we really look forward to seeing everyone in class, and thanks for giving me a moment to talk. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Eric. Boy, that's an exciting offer. I like that. Thank you. Okay, Donna, we're ready. You ready?
Okay.
Okay.
I am.
And we have quite a few. Lorena is asking, can you point me to the data that shows the DevOps approach results in fewer incidents? Is there like an average % of reduction, or is there any data like that for her?
There's not an average % of reduction because that's very much going to vary from one organization to another, and it's going to be influenced by things like how long you've had DevOps practices in place. But probably the most kind of definitive study is called the State of DevOps report, and that kind of speaks to the performance improvements that organizations that are adopting DevOps have seen. And there's also, and I'll put this in the Q&A, there's another report that was done, and I'm tempted to say it was by CA, that also provided some information about the, not only, reduction in the number of incidents, but also in the reduction in mean time to restore service. Because one of the things that's interesting is what organizations are doing is, number one, just the DevOps development practices by their nature, and I don't kind of have time to go into this, but by their nature are designed to capture quality at the source, right? And really more quickly capture errors, during development, during testing, before we even get them into the production environment, right? So that by its very nature is going to reduce the number of incidents. And then these organizations are also upping monitoring. And so by upping monitoring, what they're able to do is very quickly reduce mean time to restore. So it's not only fewer incidents, it's when incidents do occur, a shorter resolution time in order to minimize impact and restore service. So there's a definite correlation there. And I'll find the CA report and I'll put that in my post-class question.
Oh, great. Thank you. Jenny had a question early on. It was when you had that slide up that said why Scrum, when you were talking around that particular slide, and she said, so is it more of a hybrid environment for IT?
No, it's it's a methodology, right? So it's like a process like incident management or idle problem management. It's a methodology, so it's a way of working, and you can apply it in some or all parts of your organization. Again, in a lot of organizations, they already are using Scrum in the dev side of the house, and so part of the case I'm trying to make here is that it absolutely is a good fit for the service desk and support side of the house.
Oh,
but in other words, you can use it and not change your organizational structure, right? It's a method of working that you're going to that you can lay over top of your existing organizational structure. Hopefully I understood the question.
And there's a couple more that I think are going to help her with that too, Donna, when you get to them. There's a couple of other questions that are kind of around that. Praveen is asking, is there any situation where we would not be able to develop releasable product within a 4-week time frame?
Well, so I talked about this thing called the product backlog, right? Part of what you need to do with your product backlog is to chunk up your work, and very often the term used is to create user stories, but to create small enough user stories that you can, in fact, get that work done within your sprint, within your 2 to 4 week sprint. So if you're not getting a releasable product done, then theoretically what that says is you've not chunked up your work small enough that you can get to a releasable product. So one of the things that, if you look at how organizations are using Scrum from a software development standpoint, is, for example, a releasable product might be one line of code. It might, we're not necessarily talking about a new version of the software, and all of its features and functionality. We might be changing one feature of software. Or, in the context of, let's say you're doing a hardware refresh, you may then chunk that up into, I don't know, you guys are much better at these kind of projects than me, but, we're going to do the hardware in the first floor, and then we're going to do the hardware in the second floor. You would never do it that way, and I don't know how you would do it, but hopefully you understand my point. So part of it is about chunking up your work into smaller increments. I mean, that's a big part of what Agile is all about, is looking at smaller increments of work and getting, even if you're getting smaller amounts of work done, you've got that momentum of getting lots of smaller increments of work done over a shorter period of time. So that's how I would answer that.
And Drew has a question for you, Donna. He's saying, wouldn't the sprint be just the same as running a process improvement team?
Well, process improvement team would be the team, right? So when we talked about the 3 roles, the product owner and the team and the ScrumMaster, the process improvement team would be the team. And then a sprint could be that team gets together and does the process definition work, or the team gets together and defines all the procedures associated with one activity within the process, and then the next sprint they define the procedures for the next activity, and then a subsequent sprint they look at how they're going to automate those procedures. So the process improvement team is the team, and then you use Scrum to follow the methodology for designing and improving your process.
Okay, thank you. Bob is asking, he has a Kanban question. He wants to know, how does the Kanban show which tasks are dependent on the completion of other tasks?
So that's part of the sprint planning, number 1, that part of when you're doing your sprint planning and you're looking at, okay, what tasks are we going to strive to complete during this particular sprint, you'd have to take that into consideration. That's why, again, I think that's why impediments happen sometimes, because we maybe didn't realize, like, oh, okay, we're not going to be able to get this done because there's some other dependency. So that's part of what you would do as part of, there's a term called backlog grooming. You do it as part of grooming your backlog to make sure your backlog items clearly state where there are in fact dependencies, and then as part of your sprint planning, you kind of need to ensure that when you're pulling work, you're making that you're communicating those dependencies. So a lot of times, like if you Google Kanban and look at people's Kanban boards, they might just have little sticky notes, or they might have little priority numbers where they kind of order things, do this first, then do that, right? So that those dependencies are really clear and visible. Sometimes people have different colored sticky notes, right? So it's like green sticky notes are the tasks we complete first, and yellow sticky notes are the tasks we complete next. So how, you could probably make that visible in a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, it comes down to ensuring those dependencies have been clearly articulated in your backlog and during your sprint planning. And then you just figure out on your Kanban how to make it visible.
And they are colorful. They are very colorful. Whether it's the sticky notes or the soft copy version, they're beautiful, actually. Pramod has a question for you, Donna. So there's a little bit of information ahead of it. So he's saying, Donna, you said that Agile practices should be applied only for planned work or changes that emerge out of incidents, which sounds more or less like applying Agile development projects, since a change may need development. But how do you apply Agile to typical application support tickets like L1, L3?
So that's, and I'm not sure, perhaps you missed the beginning of my sentence. My suggestion is that you wouldn't. If you have incident management in place, if you have request fulfillment processes in place, I'm not suggesting that it makes sense to replace those processes. Now, having said that, I know that there are some people who use Kanban boards to manage their incident tickets, or they use Kanban boards to manage their request fulfillment projects. I understand that some organizations do that, but if you've got mature IT service management process in place, like an incident management process, let that process work. Use your service management tool to manage those tickets. Chances are you've already got a process in place for how an incident comes in and how it gets logged and how it gets escalated, and you've got all of your reporting mechanisms in place to make sure things are getting taken care of in accordance with your SLAs. I'm not talking about dismantling those processes, and so you're correct. I'm talking about introducing it in the context of projects. So you may have a request come in from a customer, and you might use Sprint in order to handle your outstanding service requests, but those typically are more project-oriented in nature than, I'm not talking about incident-related work where a person just can't get their work done, right? There's an impact to the business, and real dollars are being lost as we speak, and you need to let the incident management process do what it is well and restore service, right? So I'm talking about projects.
Right. And Manny was asking, can Agile be adopted in a fully implemented idle environment?
Absolutely. So kind of the same answer as a moment ago. In a fully implemented idle environment, you're going to have processes like incident and problem and knowledge management and request fulfillment, and you're going to let those processes continue to do what they do. The projects that perhaps flow out of those processes are where you can apply Scrum, and where you can use techniques like Kanban.
Thank you, Donna. And I have, I'm just the opposite of that from Kristen. She said that they have a very strong Agile Scrum environment. They have no IT service management, but they are going to start to introduce it very soon. So she said, what advice or resources would you recommend?
So I get, so this is an interesting question, and here's how I'm going to answer it. So I would first of all make sure that you understand what's going on in your dev organization. Are they in fact using Scrum? Are they using DevOps? So are you hearing those concepts used in your organization? Because that really does have to influence how you go forth and implement your IT service management processes. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. In a lot of organizations, the change management process is a very rigorous process, and a high percentage of changes, for example, have to go in front of the change advisory board to get approved, or there's maybe a multiple approval process before you can make a change. And I can tell you definitively that in a DevOps kind of culture, that kind of process is going to be viewed as a constraint, right? Dev's going to view it as a constraint, the business is going to view it as a constraint, and ops is going to end up being the bad guy because they're the ones that are standing in the way of dev being able to introduce changes into the production environment. So if you understand that we're practicing DevOps, and so we're making smaller, more incremental changes, smaller, lower risk incremental changes, then when you implement your change management process, for example, you're going to look at, and ITIL introduces this guidance, you're going to look at first, how can we introduce standard changes? Standard changes are kind of low risk, pre-approved changes that, you know, that change comes in the morning, it can be implemented as soon as it comes in to the production environment. So you're going to look at making sure that your processes have an appropriate amount of rigor in them, given the development methodologies that are being used and given the Agile practices that are being used in your organization. It's not to say you don't have rigor and you don't have controls in place. You just ensure that those controls are appropriate. And forgive me for any of you who have ever said me heard me say this before. In ITIL version 2, it actually said in the book that 80% of your changes should be standard changes. Well, somewhere along the line that got lost. And in a lot of organizations today, in actuality, 20% of their changes are standard changes. And that's part of why change management and IT service management very often is viewed as a constraint. So you have to be aware and you have to make sure that when you're adapting your IT service management practices, you adapt them with an understanding of the development environment, of the Agile practices that are being used, of the lean practices that are being used, of whether or not DevOps is being used, right? So be very, very aware of what practices are being used and kind of what that means, and then you'll be able to adapt your IT service management processes accordingly. We have a DevOps Foundation class, and like we have a whole section of our class where we talk about how to adapt your IT service management processes to a DevOps environment and kind of how avoid those processes being viewed as a constraint. So understand what's going on in your total IT value stream and keep that in mind. In other words, don't develop your IT service management processes in a vacuum, thinking only about them in the context of ops and production. And I'll get off my soapbox now. I'm sorry if that sounded like a lecture. I apologize.
It did. It was great information, Donna, honestly. It was great information. There's a lot of comments in here for you, too. What a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information. Great information that we can use. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. Manny has a question. He wants to know, is there any relevance between Agile and DevOps?
Yes, in fact, DevOps really came out of the fact that Dev was using these Agile practices, but Ops wasn't, right? So there ended up being this kind of core conflict in a lot of IT organizations where, you know, Agile, you know, the development teams were, you know, using Agile and they were very, very quickly able to produce software, and then they kind of came up to Ops, and Ops was like, stop, wait, you know, you must follow this perhaps overly rigorous change management process in order to get that change into the production environment. So Ops started very much being viewed as a constraint. So part of how DevOps came about was by a gentleman by the name of Patrick Dubois saying, look, how can we all work together, right? How can we ensure that dev and test and security and ops are working together throughout the development lifecycle, and that everybody has the same vision of what, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here, and that is very quickly and iteratively deliver value to the business, right? More quickly deliver great software to the business. So there's a direct correlation, and in fact, DevOps really was a offshoot, right, of Agile practices being used in dev, but not being used in ops. So the history of DevOps. Agile came first, and then DevOps followed quickly on its heels.
Thank you. Kristen was the one that has asked you the question about she's in the Agile environment now when they're going to IT service management, and she said that was very good information for her, so thank you. And awesome. Jenny said, yep, and Jenny just said, this is fantastic. So there you have it, Donna.
Awesome.
Yeah. I have another question for you from Manny. He's asking, how would Agile affect tools that are currently in place? Would there be any impact there?
Yes, and let's figure out how to, so I think, let me say a couple things about that. Number one, if you look at it in the context of Agile and DevOps and IT service management, more and more organizations are looking at shared tools. So I kind of mentioned this in my presentation, where historically Dev had one set of tools that they used and Ops had another set of the tools that they used, and the two really didn't meet. And more, especially as DevOps comes into play, organizations are looking for shared tools. So, and think about the benefits of that. I mean, it really does ensure that as, you know, incidents are occurring in the development environment, which they do, they just tend to call them bugs in Dev, right? But as bugs or faults, whatever they call them in Dev, are occurring in the development environment, there needs to be a methodology for how those get resolved, just like when incidents occur in the production environment, there needs to be a methodology for how that gets resolved. So by being able to share tools, you can have Dev and Ops working together. And you also, you know, so another example would be that historically monitoring tools have been viewed as something we use in the production environment. So we put something into production and we start monitoring it. With DevOps practices like continuous delivery and continuous deployment, and we'll talk about what those are on another day, more and more organizations are actually using monitoring all the way back in the testing and staging environments to monitor, to ensure that their things are in a releasable state. So number one, very much they have to look at shared tools. And number two, and I kind of talked about this as well, that we're seeing more and more where historically, what were historically viewed as IT service management suites, like ServiceNow, like Remedy, these tools are starting to introduce Agile modules. They're starting to introduce Kanban modules, so that we can see this same methodology, these same Agile practices being used across the IT value stream, and not just being, you know, used only in Dev or only in Ops. You know, that notion of being able to share tools and that notion of being able to increase visibility, right, through having like maybe a shared Kanban, really does now start to affect how you select your tools, right? So, you know, organizations are trying to move away from Ops. You know, in this day and age, Ops shouldn't be running a tool selection project that doesn't have a Dev person on it, and Dev shouldn't be running a tool selection project that doesn't have an Ops person on it, because at the end of the day, what you want are shared tools.
Wouldn't that simplify things?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, right. There's a question from Greg. A few people just had commented to say, what is the KCS, Donna? And so we chatted that in to let them know that that was the Knowledge Center support.
Yes, and I apologize for not defining that.
No, that's fine. But Greg is asking, you know, where can I get more information on KCS? And he said, isn't all support based on knowledge?
So where can you get more? Just Google it. Google knowledge-centered support, and you'll actually find there's a consortium, and I'll add this into my answer, but there's actually a consortium, and KCS, kind of one of the beauties of KCS is it's pretty much publicly available. The description of the KCS methodology is really available for anybody to see or download. It's not, some kind of proprietary information that you can't get your hands on easily. So if you Google knowledge-centered support, you can find that information. And isn't all support knowledge-based? I mean, yes, and even more so in this day and age. I mean, if for today we have to get better at self-service, we have to get better at, think about the younger generation coming up today, and I'm quite interested to hear what these 14-year-old kids are called in our webinar next month. But the kids today, their tendency is to Google first, ask their peers second, and then maybe they'll call the service desk. So more and more we have to get better at accommodating that, that tendency on all of our parts in this day and age to Google first to find our answer, and then when in doubt, reach out to some formalized support structure. And I think the other thing that is critical in this day and age is that with software being developed as quickly as it is, or even just whatever project you've got going on, with projects moving as quickly as they can move in an Agile environment, we have to learn that Agile can't be something that you collect after the fact, that knowledge can't be something you collect after the fact, that knowledge has to be something that you're collecting day in and day out as a part of doing your work. So I'll answer the second part of your question by saying yes, indeed. It's all about capturing knowledge and making sure that that knowledge is being, that we're not, one of the downsides of kind of traditional formalized knowledge management processes is that it's like you wrote an article and it went to the standards committee and it got rewritten according to some standards, and then somewhere, like who knows how much further down the road, it got published. Well, one of the things that KCS does is kind of say, it doesn't have to be perfect first go around. Let's just make the knowledge available, and as that knowledge gets demanded, then we'll refine it. Then we'll, and I threw out the term UFA, and somebody asked about it, and it's UFFA. Use it, flag it, fix it, add it. It's a principle within KCS. Refine it, right, as it gets demanded. Don't invest a lot of time and effort to write this perfectly polished knowledge article if that article might not ever get used again, or might not get used that frequently. Get just enough information that people get the answer they need, and then kind of move on to the next whatever challenge you're facing.
Thank you, Donna. And thank you for clarifying the UUFA, because I saw the OOFA and I Googled it, and I was like, I'm not sure that that's really what we meant. So thank you for clarifying that. And the 1 to 14-year-olds, Donna, are Gen Z or the boomlets?
Okay.
Yeah. Right? Can you imagine? I was like, what? Okay. And Mike, I know, right? And Mike just had a comment. He just said when we were talking about the tools, he said that in his personal opinion that there are many tools being used in DevOps and Agile that overlap. So each organization has to use the tool that works best for their environment and everyone that's involved in that grouping. So he was just kind of summarizing
that. Well, and that's absolutely, Mike. You're 100% correct. And you very often with DevOps hear a reference to a DevOps tool chain. So there's not the idea that you're going to have, this suite of products that, and one vendor that's going to have the magical solution that's going to solve, and deal with every single process. You're absolutely right. There's lots of tools, and the question is, can those tools integrate, right? Or can we ensure that if there are tools that are supporting the same processes, we're sharing those tools instead of having dev have one tool and ops have another tool, and then having to deal with the data transfer that has to occur, or the data transfer that doesn't occur, unfortunately, sometimes. because you're not sharing a tool. So the idea of a DevOps tool chain, and yeah, finding those solutions that work, right, for whatever, but being able to integrate them together and being able to kind of be able to see the whole IT value stream through your tools. Because otherwise you're probably not going to be able to automate as much as you would like to automate. You know, you're not going to be able to get a single, you know, a clear picture of your end-to-end environment, right? There's all kinds of downsides there. So.
Thank you. And more comments. Thank you, Donna. Excellent presentation. Thank you for a great webinar.